The war had ended, but the echoes of devastation remained. Two alien races, the Vortons and the Krells, had clashed in a brutal conflict spanning solar systems, leaving cities in ruin and psyches fractured. The Vortons, though victorious, emerged from the war mentally shattered. Their victory had come at a high cost, not only in lives but in something far more intangible, their peace of mind. Nightmares plagued them, and the horrors they had both witnessed and inflicted festered in their minds like open wounds. No matter how advanced their technology, it could not undo the psychological damage that had rooted itself deep within their collective consciousness. Among the survivors were the highest-ranking officials, commanders, and soldiers, each carrying their scars in silence. They were beings of immense power, capable of traversing galaxies and bending physics, but they could not outrun their own trauma. The once stoic General Threx, leader of the Vorton military, now paced in his chambers, his hands trembling uncontrollably. His eyes, once sharp with strategic brilliance, now stared blankly as if lost in a fog of regret. He had led his people to victory, yet felt as though he had condemned them to eternal torment. In the aftermath, the Vortons sought every remedy within their advanced medical knowledge. They had technology that could heal broken bones, regenerate tissue, and even extend life indefinitely. Yet, for all their advancements, they lacked a cure for the mental scars. Psychotherapy from their most esteemed minds yielded little more than frustration. Neurological rewiring, often successful with less intense trauma, seemed to only numb the pain temporarily before it came rushing back, fiercer than before. The communal meditation sessions, where entire cities would gather to channel their mental energies toward healing, had failed too. The once revered practices now seemed hollow and ineffective in the face of such profound despair. The Krells, who had been the enemy in the conflict, had fared no better. Though defeated, their survivors were equally haunted, their minds broken by the same war that had ravaged the Vortons. Across the galaxy, both races grappled with the same question. How could they heal what they could not even fully understand? The answer seemed to lie beyond their own capabilities, in something or someone foreign. As the Vortons grew desperate, they turned to the unlikeliest of solutions. A rumor had reached their ears, carried on the whispers of traders and travelers from distant human settlements. It spoke of a peculiar human, a barber by trade, whose head massages were said to have near magical effects. This human, it was said, could ease the most troubled minds with the simplest of gestures, using nothing more than his hands and an understanding of pressure points. It was an absurd notion at first, a human barber, of all things, being the solution to the advanced Vorton race's deepest anguish. But with no other options left, the idea took root. The barber's name was spoken in council meetings and quietly discussed among the Vorton elite. Perhaps there was something in the primitive human touch that their technology could not replicate. The idea gained momentum, and soon a delegation was sent to Earth where the barber, his fame now known across human colonies, was found in a modest shop, far removed from the chaos of galactic politics. His name was Carl, and he was an ordinary man by most measures, known for his sharp scissors and firm handshake. But it was his head massages that had garnered attention. His clients swore by his ability to melt away stress, to make the world seem right again, if only for a moment. Carl didn't consider himself special, but his hands had a way of working wonders, guided by instinct more than knowledge. The Vortons approached him cautiously, uncertain of how to explain their predicament. After all, they were an advanced race, and asking for help from a human seemed beneath them. But desperation has a way of humbling even the most powerful beings. They offered Carl an enormous sum of money, resources, and the promise of safe passage through the stars. All they wanted was his head massages. Carl, intrigued and slightly bewildered, accepted the offer. He had no idea what awaited him on the alien world, but he understood one thing. No matter the species, stress and pain were universal. And if he could offer a bit of comfort, even to those from another world, then it was worth the journey. As he boarded their ship, the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on him. But Carl had a quiet confidence, After all, he had always believed in the power of a good head massage, and now he would put that belief to the ultimate test. Carl stepped off the Vorten ship and onto an alien world that felt both familiar and foreign. The skies were a soft lavender hue, the ground beneath him buzzing faintly with some unknown energy, and in the distance, towering structures glistened, their geometric shapes casting strange shadows. The Vorten delegation that had brought him here moved with an eerie quietness, their faces marked by a tension that seemed permanently etched into their alien features. It was clear they weren't just skeptical of Carl. They were desperate. He was taken directly to the Central Healing Facility, a place where the Vortens had once cured every ailment imaginable. But now, even in this advanced center, there was a pervasive sense of defeat. Rows of Vortens sat motionless, eyes distant, as they waited for another round of fruitless therapy. The sight stirred something in Carl, a deep understanding of human suffering, though here it transcended species. His first client was a Vorten named Zinhos, a former commander in the war. Zinhos's tall, sinewy form twitched with nervous energy, and his translucent skin seemed to pulse, a symptom of his uncontrollable anxiety. Carl wasn't sure how his human hands would affect an alien physiology so different from his own, but he approached with the same quiet confidence that had served him in his small aside barbershop. Zinhos sat in the chair, his posture rigid, his breathing shallow. Carl stood behind him, feeling the tension coiled within the alien's body. Gently, he placed his hands on Zinhos's temples. The Vorten flinched slightly at first, unaccustomed to such intimate contact from another species, but Carl's touch was calm, deliberate. He had no fancy equipment, no advanced technology, just his hands and an understanding that sometimes it wasn't about fixing what was broken, but simply easing the burden of carrying it. Carl began with slow, circular motions, applying light pressure as his fingers traced the contours of Zinhos's scalp. His hands moved intuitively, guided by years of practice and a deep respect for the physical act of relaxation. Zinhos's initial resistance melted away, his body sinking further into the chair as Carl's fingers worked along his neck and behind his ears, finding pressure points that hadn't been touched in years. The effect was almost immediate. Zinhos's rigid muscles softened and his breathing deepened, becoming rhythmic and calm. Carl didn't know the exact science behind it, but he understood the language of touch. It was universal, crossing boundaries of species, language, and culture. The Vorten's thoughts slowed, the chaotic swirl of war memories and guilt easing into the background. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Zinhos's mind found quiet. As Carl finished, Zinhos opened his eyes slowly, blinking as if seeing the world anew. His previously clenched hands now rested loosely on the arms of the chair. He turned to look at Carl, a mixture of disbelief and gratitude in his expression, emotions that were strikingly human. Without a word, Zinhos stood, his gaze lingering on Carl before he left the room, walking with a sense of peace that had been absent for far too long. Word of Zinhos's transformation spread quickly. More Vortens came, some hesitant, others curious, but all desperate for the same relief. Carl treated them one by one, each session revealing more about how universal the need for comfort truly was. His technique wasn't just about the physical act of massaging. There was something deeper in the simple, tactile connection. It bridged the gap between species, bypassing the need for words or advanced alien science. Carl's hands moved over crests and ridges on the Vorten skulls, each alien reacting differently, but all finding some measure of solace in his touch. As the days passed, the demand for his head massages grew, with even the highest-ranking Vorten officials seeking his services. Some came with chronic tension, others with the kind of fatigue that no amount of rest could cure, but all left changed in some subtle way. In the midst of this, Carl remained humble. He wasn't curing the Vortens of their trauma, he knew that. The memories of war, the pain and loss, they would still linger. But what he offered was something just as powerful. A reprieve, a moment of peace where the burdens of the past no longer felt so heavy. And sometimes that was enough. As Carl's reputation spread, He found himself at a pivotal moment. The Vortons, once skeptical of a human's ability to heal, now looked to him with hope. But could one man's hands truly carry the weight of an entire species suffering? As the weeks passed, the once somber halls of the Vorton Healing Facility began to stir with new life. Carl's head massages had transformed from a curious experiment into a cultural phenomenon. The aliens, once skeptical of human touch, now lined up outside the facility in a quiet, orderly fashion, their expressions softer, less burdened by the invisible weight they had carried since the war. Carl, ever the modest Barber, found himself at the center of something far greater than he had imagined. The change in the Vorton people was palpable. General Threx, once a figure of cold command, had become a vocal advocate for Carl's methods. After a single session with the Barber, he emerged with a calm that was almost unrecognizable. His once haunted eyes had regained a clarity that his soldiers hadn't seen since before the war. Under Carl's care, Threx began addressing his people with a newfound compassion. He spoke not only of victory but of healing, urging the Vortons to embrace the simple yet profound power of peace. It wasn't just the high-ranking officials who sought Carl's help. Soldiers, engineers, scientists, aliens from all walks of life came to experience his healing touch. One particularly notable case was a young Vorton named Lyra, a communication officer who had suffered from debilitating panic attacks since her time on the front lines. Lyra had grown so accustomed to her suffering that she had forgotten what peace felt like. But after a single session, her panic eased, replaced by a calm she hadn't known in years. She left Carl's chair with tears in her eyes, not from pain but from the release of it. As more and more Vortons shared similar stories, Carl's reputation spread beyond the planet's borders. Traders and diplomats from other alien species began to hear whispers of the human who could do what no technology or medicine had accomplished. The story of Carl's massages traveled across the galaxy, turning his small aside barbershop into a beacon of hope for those still grappling with the scars of interstellar war. Yet Carl remained grounded. Despite the overwhelming demand for his services, he never lost sight of what mattered most: the simple act of offering comfort. Each session was a personal experience, and no two Vortons were the same. He treated them not as alien clients, but as beings with a universal need for care, approaching each massage with the same calm, patient energy. It wasn't about fixing them, but rather giving them a space where they could, if only for a moment, let go of their suffering. The Vortons, in their gratitude, offered Carl riches beyond his imagination. They presented him with precious metals mined from distant moons, access to technology that could extend his lifespan by centuries, and even a permanent residence on their homeworld. But Carl declined these lavish gifts. What he valued most was not material wealth, but the knowledge that he had made a difference, however small, in the lives of those who had once been lost in despair. Still, the Vortons insisted on honoring him in some way. They established the Carl method, a practice that would be taught in their healing academies for generations to come. Vorton healers began to study the human art of touch, combining it with their own therapies to create a holistic approach to mental well-being. Carl's name became synonymous with healing, not only among the Vortons, but across many allied races who had heard of his work. Carl returned to Earth after his time with the Vortons. He was content to return to his barbershop, where the pressures of galactic fame couldn't reach him. But his legacy lived on, and long after his departure, Vorton leaders continued to seek him out, not just for his massages but for the wisdom he had imparted. That sometimes the greatest gift you can offer isn't a solution, but simply a touch of compassion. The war between the Vortons and the Krells had left scars that no technology could erase, but in Carl's hands, the Vortons found a way to heal. They had expected a miracle from the stars, but instead, they found it in something much simpler: a human's quiet, steady hands and the undeniable power of a human touch.